Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint River Basin Drought Assessment webinar for the month of February. I'm Rachel McGuire with the Auburn University Water Resources Center located in Auburn, Alabama. Today's speakers will be David Zierden, the Florida State climatologist at the Florida Climate Center at Florida State University. He'll be speaking with us about our current drought status and our seasonal forecasts and outlooks. I'll be presenting on behalf of Tom Littlepage, the branch chief of the Alabama Office of Water Resources with the state of Alabama input. We'll also hear from Paul Ankhorn, a hydrologist and surface water specialist with the USGS South Atlantic Water Science Center. He'll speak with us on our streamflows and groundwater conditions. We'll also hear from Jeffrey Dober of the NOAA National Weather Service Southeast River Forecast Center. He'll be speaking with us about our streamflow forecast for the ACF. And lastly, we will hear from Troy Ephraim from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Mobile District on our ACF reservoir conditions. And I have just a few housekeeping items. At the end of the webinar, we'll have time for comments, questions, and any discussion. So I ask for you to hold those questions till the end for any of our speakers. Also, you can use the question box on the GoToMeeting tool panel. You can type your questions, or you can push the raise your hand icon that's also located on the GoToMeeting tool panel. And lastly, speakers, please remember to unmute yourself prior to speaking and give me a cue whenever you would like the slide advanced. And I believe that's all for housekeeping. Now I'd like to turn it over to our first speaker, David Zierden. Do we have you ready, David?
Yeah, do you hear me?
I do, loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm ready to go. And we'll go ahead and start off this webinar by talking about the paradox of drought, especially here in the panhandle of Florida. With all the rain over the last week, a very heavy band of 5 inches or more across central Alabama and Georgia, on top of all the rain we've had over the past couple months, the entire Apalachicola River is now under flood warnings, as is much of the Flint River in southwest Georgia. However, just one county over in Wakulla and Leon counties here in the Panhandle, even D2 or moderate drought, this severe drought has been introduced in the last week. So it's kind of a paradox how we could have severe drought conditions so close to what is a river at flood stage. But as we go on to the next slide, we'll take a closer look at this. One big question is, do we measure drought solely by its departure from normal rainfall or other hydrologic indicators, or do we also have to consider impacts? And that's one of the tough questions right now, where this D2 is. A vast majority of these counties, Franklin and Wakulla counties, are uninhabited state and national forest. And while there has been a very localized lack of rainfall, there's been enough rainfall that wildfire is not a concern yet, certainly not in the winter months now. And also area streamflows, while the Apalachicola is near the 98th or 99th percentile right now, just one county over, the Sopchoppy River, which is a much more limited flow or limited drainage area, is still below 10%. So yeah, even there are some hydrologic indicators that indicate that although highly localized, there is drought in this area. But on the next slide, I was able to flesh out some impacts, some local impacts, and this is hitting the oyster industry right now. Since the collapse of the wild oyster fishery in Apalachicola Bay in 2012, more and more oysters have been farmed, and where these oyster leases are not located in Apalachicola Bay, but in the small Alligator Harbor just to the east, which is really not fed by any significant streams or rivers. So talking with an oyster farmer down there this past week. She's doing okay, but other farmers are reporting high mortality due to the high salinity levels in Alligator Harbor. So while the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint Basin has received plenty of rainfall and is at flood stage, there's still localized dry pockets that are affecting the oyster industry. So with that little bit of storytelling and background, we'll go ahead and start looking at recent rainfall. And this is the radar estimates of rainfall over the last week or 7 days. And you see the very heavy amounts over the middle ACF basin and even headwaters region around Atlanta, amounts of 5 to 7 inches, or at least 4 to 5 inches over the last 7 days alone. Down here in the lower ACF and the Florida Panhandle, we were lagging behind until last night. You see a yellow stripe down in the lower basin where we picked up 2 to 3 inches of rainfall over portions of the Florida Panhandle. So that was very welcome, especially in this pocket of moderate and severe drought. On the next slide, we'll go back even further, and this starts to tell the big picture story. There you see across, this is rainfall estimates over now the last 30 days, and you see across entire North Alabama and north half of Georgia, 30-day totals of over 10 inches, even eclipsing 15 inches in some locations, and that includes Lake Lanier and the headwaters region, and even most of the middle ACF basin. So just more than plentiful rain over the last 30 days. In excess, I'm sure we'll hear from Paul Ancorn about the state of the streamflow gauges, and also we'll hear about the reservoirs, how basically this basin is plumb full right now, and it's a matter of too much water rather than drought right now. On the next slide, we'll look even further back, and this shows this rainy pattern has been persisting over the last several months. Now we're looking at departures from normal over the last 90 days. And you can see the much above normal rainfall over North Alabama and North Georgia, even down into Southeast Alabama. But you also see the dryness in the Florida Panhandle and the Leon County, Wakulla County areas where the moderate drought still exists. And I don't have it shown, but if you go back even further, 180 days, the deficits really show up in this small pocket of 12 to 15 inches or more. So this kind of tells the story of the state of the basin right now. We'll go ahead to the next slide and start looking ahead. And thankfully, the 7-day quantitative precipitation forecast shows a little bit of a break in the rainfall. We're looking at a pattern shift, bringing colder, drier air mass in a couple days to persist through the end of the week. And over the next 7 days, only fractions of an inch of rainfall are forecast for much of the ACF basin, which will be a welcome drying period after all the rain we've received. We'll go ahead to the next slide and start looking at the state of the Pacific Ocean, and things continue to chug on in the neutral phase. We do see some warming in the central and even western Pacific. Some even classified this as a weak Mordecai El Nino. I'm not so convinced, but it depends on the threshold you use. But further east in the eastern Pacific, the traditional El Nino region, we see just mixed anomalies, some cold, some warm, kind of a good indication we are in the neutral phase. And on the bottom, we see our Nino 3.4 index that has been hovering at or below that half-degree threshold for the last couple months. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and start seeing what the forecasts say. With some considering this a Mordecai El Nino, we see that the probabilistic forecast for the first period, the January, February, March, actually shows a higher probability of El Nino conditions. But however, as we get further into the spring and summer, then the neutral again dominates, and it's by far the most likely that we'll remain in neutral conditions through the spring and well into the summer. And just to get an idea of the model spread, over on the right are the different sea surface temperature prediction models for that region. And we see as we get into summer and even early fall, we see a good spread in the models, but they're mostly hovering around that zero line, which would make the continued neutral phase the most likely. There are two or three models that are predicting a rapid cooling into the La Nina phase over the summer, including NOAA's CFS version 2. But as you can see, they're pretty strong outliers, and we are on the winter side of this spring prediction barrier right now. So any of these results have to be taken with a grain of salt. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead to the next slide, and this just shows again the CFS version 2 forecast for the Nino 3.4 region, and this is an ensemble forecast, but you see the ensemble mean shows a quick, rather rapid transition into colder than normal sea surface temperatures or the La Nina phase. But again, at this time of the year, this forecast, it's only one model and needs to be taken with a grain of salt. So with that in mind, we'll go to the next slide and look at our seasonal outlook from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center. The temperature outlook on the left has been very consistent over the past few cycles, showing continued increased chance of above normal temperatures across the southern United States and the southeast and the ACF basin. The precipitation forecast over on the right has changed a little bit and now is favoring above average precipitation over the next 3 months as we get into spring and early summer. So this would suggest a continuation of very wet conditions across the southeast and the ACF basin. And on the next slide, we'll finish up with the seasonal drought outlook, which because very little of the eastern or even central United States is currently in drought, there's not a lot to say. The small pocket of moderate drought in the Panhandle is forecast to remain but improve, or that improvement is even likely. So we'll go ahead to the next slide and just summarize that flooding continues on the Apalachicola and Flint rivers due to both rainfall over the past week and just the accumulation over the last 2 or 3 months. Severe drought has been introduced just one county over in Wakulla and Leon counties. The weekly to 30-day rainfall is extensive over the upper and middle ACF basin, but especially at 90 days is even still below normal over the Florida Panhandle. We are looking at a pattern shift to bring colder temperatures and clearing to the southeast this week and a little relief from the rainfall. Neutral conditions are currently in the Pacific and forecast to continue through winter and well into the summer is probably the best forecast. The CPC seasonal outlooks favors higher chances for warm temperatures and now also higher chances for above normal rainfall. And the only drought remaining in the area is that one isolated pocket in Leon, Wakulla counties, and even abnormally dry, extending up just a little bit over the state line into Georgia.
All right. Thank you, David, for the update. It's amazing how you can have the subtropical at less than 10% just next door, the Apalachicola nearly flooding its banks, or in some cases flooding.
Yeah, and we actually had the opposite situation. Was it back in 2008 or maybe 2010, where during the summertime it was very dry up in the middle and headwaters region, and flows on the Apalachicola were near at historic lows, but the Florida Panhandle had plenty of coastal rain from our normal summer
Mm-hmm.
sea breeze thunderstorms. So the drought was confined to a very narrow corridor through the panhandle along the ACF River Basin and the Apalachicola Valley.
Interesting. Well, thank you again for your update, David. And now I'm going to speak on the state of Alabama input on behalf of Tom Littlepage from the Office of Water Resources. So, not a whole lot going on in Alabama in terms of drought. This is our most recent drought monitor. You can see there's only a single county, Mobile County, in the southwest extreme of Alabama that has a small pocket of DO right on the coast. But other than that, there are no abnormally dry or drought conditions throughout the state. And because of that, our most recent drought declaration that was actually put together yesterday has none of the Alabama regions in an advisory watch or warning. So there are no drought declarations for the state. I did want to remind everybody to utilize the drought impacts report tool on the ADECA Office of Water Resources website. The link below will get you to that information, but you can also send in information to be added. If you've been on recent webinars, Tom has showed some screenshots of some of those impacts that have been submitted, most of which are agricultural in nature. But do remember that is a tool that can be used both for submission and for reference. So a bit of the same story that David's been speaking about. We've had widespread rainfall. There's more rain forecasted for the next week. There aren't any reported drought or water availability issues throughout the state. The Office of Water Resources will continue monitoring these conditions, but there's not a whole lot to report for now. Also, there aren't any scheduled meetings for the Alabama Monitoring and Impact Group, which should come as no surprise with the current conditions that we're experiencing. So it's a bit quiet on the Alabama front. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Paul Ancorn for our Streamflows and groundwater conditions. Do we have you ready, Paul?
I'm ready, Rachel.
Great, I can hear you just fine.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. So we'll begin by looking at real-time stream flows across the southeast there. And on the right graphic, you can see most of our stations, at least in Georgia and the ACF Basin, are running in the high to much above normal flow rankings. So we're looking at flows in excess of the 90th percentile, all the way up to the headwaters of the basin. Chattahoochee at Helen is currently high, and then moving further down, as David pointed out, the majority of the rivers are actually in flood stage, especially on the Flint. So plenty of water, and this was pulled yesterday, so it'll change today. I'll take a look at the next slide. We're looking here at below normal 7-day average stream flow. So these are indications of hydrologic drought, and as you can see, Georgia and Alabama are both hydrologic drought free, and majority of Florida also, with that one exception, as David pointed out, the Sochopi Basin down there is just showing a ranking of currently in the low condition there. So good news for the ACF with that regard. So we'll move to the next slide, and we'll start looking at the 28-day average flow. So the black line there indicates the previous 28 days mean discharge. So this is a long-term average, and then of course they're ranked accordingly with each flow for that day. So you can see these are Lake Lanier inflows, and both Chattahoochee River Cornelia and the Chastity both peaked up into record high flows. So we're setting high trend there for those two rivers, increasing flow. Next slide, we shall look at flows below Lake Lanier. So this is Chattahoochee at Atlanta and Whitesburg. And both of those 28-day average flows are currently in the much above normal, approaching the 95th percentile there at both stations. The next slide is further downstream. This is Chattahoochee at West Point and then Columbus. So the same story there. West Point's just topped the 95th percentile as well as Columbus. So both 28-day average flows are well into the much above normal ranges we're expecting. The next slide, we'll switch over to Griffin, or the Flint River Basin. So first upstream station is Griffin, where 28-day average flow there is also much above normal. And then Flint River Carsonville has just exceeded a new high flow. And if you compare that with just 5 months ago, we were setting exceedance in the low flow area. So we've really flipped the table on that one. And just looking at the real-time flow last week, we had flows at that station in exceeding 35,000 cubic feet per second. So that site was in flood stage. We'll look on the next slide, moving further downstream, still in the Flint River. So Albany is right at the 95th percentile, and Bainbridge is approaching the 95th percentile. And then finally, the next slide, we'll see Apalachicola at Chattahoochee, and the same story there, well into the much above normal with 28-day average flows approaching 95th percentile. All right, so that's surface water. Our next slide, we'll look at our groundwater conditions. So the current brief conditions are on the right, and you can see much across the whole basin there. Groundwater levels are anywhere from much above normal to much below normal, but a majority of the elevations we're showing are right around the normal rank. And so the two circled stations, those are our reference sites that we look at each month. And we'll begin on the next slide with our Miller County. And so flows since our, well, not flows, but elevation since our last webinar have increased there also, which is typical for the trend there, increasing trend for this time of year. But the elevation there is right at the 60th percentile, and we're in normal conditions for Miller County. We'll look at Doherty County on the next slide. And so that well, we have just exceeded or moved into the next ranking. So we're showing elevation there to be above normal with an increasing trend. So next slide, I'll give you my summary. So yep, real-time stream flows for the ACF Basin currently rank from high to above normal range. And as I mentioned, no portions of the ACF are currently ranked as hydrologic drought as per the normal 7-day average stream flow. 28-day average stream flow for the Chattahoochee River currently much above normal range, with no extremes recorded at Cornelia and Chestatee River at Dahlonega. Also, for the 28-day average flow in the Flint River, we're looking at much above normal, with new extreme recorded at Flint River Carsonville. And then finally, real-time groundwater levels across the basin range from high to much below normal, but with the majority of stations ranking in the normal range. And that concludes it, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Now I'd like to turn it over to Jeff Dober for our stream flow forecast for the ACF. Do we have you ready, Jeff?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, super. Thank you, Rachel, and good afternoon, everyone. Here's our 1-month mean daily stream flow forecast for pretty much the month of March, which is our typical primary recharge period for most of the Southeast and the ACF. And as David pointed out, we had 10 plus inches above normal for the last 30 days across the large majority of the watershed. The stream flows are running right now currently above to much above normal, and so we're going to continue to follow this trend through much of March. As I think was also pointed out, we may see some reprieve from the number of rain systems that we've been having over the next couple of weeks, but we're still going to be cool. And with pools running high right now, Lanier is running at 1076. This is about 5 feet above where they want to be at this time of year. And with those pools running high, there's going to be quite a bit of water that's going to be continuing to pass through the system, even from the very top of the watershed there at Lanier. So right now we're looking at above normal for the entire basin through the month of March. As far as the 3-month mean daily stream flow forecast, this will take us now into all of May. And right now you can see the forecast is for above normal. We're going to continue that trend. Right now our ensemble stream flow prediction pie charts there also giving us the best chances to be above normal through this 3-month period. And again, this is supported by most of the information that David and Paul have just talking about as far as the basin as a whole. So that's our 1 and 3 month stream flow forecast. So in summary, I guess just repeat, above normal. We don't see anything really changing. We're going into the primary recharge period. It's usually a wet period as it is. And with pools high, we'll continue to see that through the spring period and potentially into late spring. And that's all I have from Southeast RFC.
Thank you, Jeff. And I don't believe Troy was able to make the call today, so I'll be presenting on his behalf for our ACF reservoir conditions from the Mobile District of the Army Corps of Engineers. So Jeff already spoiled it a little bit for Lake Lanier. We're at, as of midnight, the pool elevation was 1,076.33 feet. Jeff mentioned that's approximately 5 feet above the guide curve. So right now, the elevation is exceeding the top of conservation line, and it's forecasted to decrease back towards the line of the top of conservation, but it's currently fairly high even for this time of year during recharge. So moving on to West Point, the midnight pool elevation was 630.17 feet. A little bit of a similar story. It's above the guide curve currently, and it's forecasted to dip but still follow a line above that top of conservation in the coming weeks. Walter F. George midnight pool elevation was 189.37 feet. Currently, the elevation is also above guide curve, and it is projected to decrease but still maintain above the top of conservation line in the coming few weeks. Lastly, we have Jim Woodruff with a midnight pool elevation of 76.99 feet. The elevation spiked in mid-February but has since declined, and that elevation is forecasted to increase in the coming week, followed by a decrease in subsequent plateau into mid to late March. So when we look at the ACF Basin composite of conservation and flood storage chart, we see that all of these projects are indeed above the guide curve for this time of year, bringing it above the top of conservation line. That you can see this top line right here. And they are working to lower the project pool elevations closer to that guide curve with the break in the rain over the next week. So in summary, all of the inflows into the projects are above normal. Lanier, Walter F. George, West Point, and Jim Woodruff are operating above guide curve. and it is expected that those projects will approach the guide curve over the next few weeks as summer refilling begins. And the ACF system conservation storage, this is incorrect. It is not in zone 1. It is above the top of conservation and is forecasted to stay above the top of conservation line for the next few weeks. Now at this time, I'd like to invite Meredith Muth of NIDIS to speak about a couple upcoming events that are very pertinent to all of us on the line right now. Do we have you ready to tell us about our upcoming events, Meredith?
Yes, Rachel, I'm here.
Great.
Great, thank you so much for having me. We've been talking about the creation of a new online GIS-based interface that would serve the ACF River Basin in terms of looking at drought information in real time and at local levels. And so to develop this idea, which has come out of the ACF stakeholders group and ACF Drought Early Warning System partners, we are holding a series of 3 listening sessions. We're only asking that people need to attend one, but this is a great opportunity for us to understand how drought information is accessed, used, and what would a tool most useful look like for you. And we'll take the feedback from these sessions, which are really less than a day, and then use that to design a prototype that we will put out in the fall for further input. So if anyone is able to attend, the first one is next week in East Point, Florida, right in Apalachicola. And then the next couple in April and May will be moving up the basin. So if you have any questions, you can contact Kristen at Albany State. Her name is right there. Or you can link on that. There's a link that gives a little bit more information and background on what it is. Next. Oh, and that's it. Oh, thank you. And just to let everyone know that save the date has come out for the ACF Water Conference. This will be in late April in Albany, Georgia. Please go ahead, check out the webpage, look at it, register. This conference will highlight research initiatives, great opportunity to share who is doing what throughout the basin, in particular on water for management. It's open to a whole host of people, and we encourage you to attend if you're interested. And please feel free to share both the listening session for the Drought Dashboard and the water conference information within your networks as broadly as you would like. Thank you.
Thanks, Meredith. Sorry about having those slides out of order. Caught me off guard too. So there's several really interesting events coming up for determining the direction of some of our tools that we'll be using for drought conditions in the ACF. So I'd like to open it up to any of our attendees who may have questions or points of discussion for any of our speakers today. And I'll give just a little bit of time for you to use the raise your hand icon, or if you'd like to type in a question, you may do so as well. All right, well, if we don't have any questions coming in, I'd like to thank our speakers one last time, David Zierden of the Florida Climate Center, Tom Littlepage for sending in information from the Alabama Office of Water Resources, Paul Ankhorn of the USGS South Atlantic Water Science Center, Jeffrey Dober from the Southeast River Forecast Center, and thank you to Troy Ephraim of the Army Corps of Engineers Mobile District for sending in our reservoir information. Our next webinar will be Tuesday, March 24th, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central. We'll now be posting video recordings of these webinars online by YouTube, and you can find that information by either finding the NIDIS channel on YouTube, or you can also use the drought.gov website or the Auburn University Water Resources Center website. My name's Rachel McGuire, and thank you everyone for attending today.